For 20 long years, Adrian Cole lived a life colder than the walls of his glass empire. People called him a genius, a billionaire, a man with no heart. Reporters followed his every move, but none ever captured a smile. His name was written in gold across city towers, yet his nights were silent, filled only with the hum of machines and the echo of his past. Adrian was the kind of man who built a world so high that no one could reach him anymore. Once, 2 decades ago, Adrian believed in love. He believed in forever, in morning coffees shared with laughter, in soft promises made under the rain. But everything changed on the day that should have been the happiest of his life. He stood at the altar waiting for the woman he loved, his heart full of dreams. But she never came. The guests whispered. The music stopped. And in one silent moment, Adrian's world fell apart. Since that day, he changed. He stopped believing in love, in smiles, in warmth. He threw himself into his company, working day and night. He told himself love was a weakness, emotions were distractions, and success was the only thing that could never betray him. People in his office feared him. When he entered a room, silence followed. His dark eyes were sharp, his voice calm but cold, every word measured like a business deal. He never laughed, never lingered, never trusted. Many assistants came and went, unable to handle his perfection and pressure. But fate has its own plans, and on one ordinary Monday morning, something unusual happened. It began with a knock on his glass door. His secretary walked in holding a file. "Sir, your new assistant is waiting," she said softly, trying not to meet his eyes. Adrian didn't look up from his laptop. "Send her in," he replied, his tone as distant as always. The door opened again, and a young woman stepped inside. Her name was Lena Hart. She wasn't dressed in expensive brands like most applicants who came to impress him. She wore a simple white blouse, neat trousers, and carried a calm confidence in her eyes. Her brown hair was tied back loosely, and she smiled politely as she entered. Adrian lifted his gaze for just a second, and froze. Something about her face made his heart stir, something he couldn't name. He didn't show it, but for the first time in years, his heartbeat changed. Lena placed her file on the table. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," she said. Her voice was clear, soft, yet steady. Adrian didn't respond right away. He studied her like he studied business proposals, carefully, with no emotion showing. "You have experience?" he asked. "Yes, sir. I worked as an executive assistant for 3 years," she replied. "I'm organized, punctual, and good at handling pressure." He leaned back in his chair. "Pressure?" he repeated slowly, almost amused. "You'll need to be better than good. People don't last long here." Lena didn't flinch. "Then maybe I'll be the first," she said simply. For a second, Adrian almost smiled, but he stopped himself. "We'll see," he said, dismissing her with a nod. She thanked him and turned to leave. But as she reached the door, she paused and looked back. "Sir," she said softly, "you don't have to act like you'd be made of ice all the time." He looked up sharply, but she was already gone. That single sentence echoed in his mind for the rest of the day. He tried to focus on his meetings, his reports, his never-ending calls, but something inside him felt different. He hadn't heard words like that in years. That night, as the city lights blinked outside his office window, Adrian found himself thinking about her again. Her calm eyes, her confident tone, the way she spoke without fear. He told himself it was nothing, just curiosity, just another assistant. But deep down, something small and quiet had awakened in his heart. The next morning, Lena started her first day. She was early, earlier than anyone else in the building. She cleaned his desk, organized his schedule, and prepared his favorite black coffee, even though no one had told her how he liked it. When Adrian walked in, he noticed the coffee waiting for him, hot and perfect. "Who told you about this?" he asked. "No one," she said. "I just guessed." You look like someone who likes things simple and strong." He stared at her for a moment, unsure how to respond. Then he took a sip, and it was exactly right. Throughout the day, she worked quietly but efficiently. Unlike others, she didn't talk too much or try to impress him. She just did her job with calm focus. When employees made mistakes, Adrian usually shouted, but when Lena made one small error on a file, she admitted it instantly. "My mistake, sir. I'll fix it right away." He blinked, surprised. No excuses. No panic. Just honesty. He didn't say anything, but something inside him respected that. Days turned into weeks. Lena became a small but steady part of his cold routine. She greeted him every morning, smiled even when he didn't reply, and stayed late to make sure everything ran smoothly. Then, one evening, as rain poured outside and everyone else had gone home, Adrian noticed the light still on in the outer office. Curious, he stepped out, and there she was, sitting at her desk, typing fast, tired but focused. He spoke quietly. "Why are you still here?" She jumped slightly, then looked up. "You needed these reports ready for tomorrow. I didn't want you to miss your meeting." He frowned. "That's not your responsibility. Go home." "I will," she said softly, "once it's done." For a moment, Adrian stood there, unsure what to say. No one had cared about his work like that, not for years. Everyone feared him or wanted something from him. But Lena, she just wanted to help. When he turned to leave, she said something unexpected. "Sir, do you ever get tired?" He stopped. "Of what?" "Of pretending you don't feel anything." Her words hit him like a storm. He didn't answer. He just walked back into his office and closed the door. But that night, he couldn't sleep. The next morning, he found a small note beside his coffee mug. It said, "You should smile more, Mr. Cole. The world doesn't end if you do." He stared at it for a long time. Then, almost unwillingly, a small smile touched his lips. It felt strange, rusty, like using a part of himself that had been locked away for years. He didn't throw the note away. Instead, he kept it inside his desk drawer. From that day forward, things began to change slowly. He didn't understand why, but he found himself looking forward to mornings, to the sound of Lena's footsteps, to her soft voice saying, "Good morning, sir." His other employees noticed it too. The atmosphere in the office started to shift. The once silent and tense rooms now carried a softer energy. Adrian didn't yell as much. He listened more, and though he would never admit it, it was all because of one woman who had dared to talk to him like he was human again. One afternoon, during a board meeting, a senior manager made a rude comment about Lena's inexperience. Before she could defend herself, Adrian spoke. "She's better than most people in this room," he said firmly. The room went quiet. Lena looked at him in surprise. It was the first time he had ever stood up for anyone. Later that day, she thanked him. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," he replied simply. "But I wanted to." Something in his voice made her heart skip. For a moment, she saw a glimpse of the man he used to be, the man behind the cold eyes. But as much as Adrian was changing, he still didn't understand why Lena's presence felt so familiar, why her voice sometimes reminded him of a past he tried to forget. Every time she smiled, he saw flashes of something buried deep in his memory, something painful, something unfinished. He tried to ignore it, but destiny has a strange way of connecting souls. That night, as he watched her leave the office, he whispered to himself, "Why does she feel like someone I used to know?" Outside, the city lights blurred through the rain. Inside, Adrian Cole sat alone again. But this time, he wasn't surrounded by silence. He was surrounded by thoughts of her, the woman who had dared to step into his frozen world and somehow, without even trying, made it start to melt. And for the first time in 20 years, Adrian Cole didn't feel completely alone. He didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of something far deeper, something that would challenge everything he believed, every wall he built, every fear he buried. Because sometimes love doesn't knock softly. It just walks in, smiles, and changes everything. Adrian Cole walked into his tower at dawn, but the office felt different now. No one knew exactly why, but everyone sensed it. The boss had changed. His eyes weren't as cold, his voice no longer carried that sharp, cutting edge. The reason for this transformation sat just outside his door, a woman named Lena Hart. Every morning, without fail, she would greet him with a warm, "Good morning, Mr. Cole." At first, he'd just offer a stiff nod in return. Then, one day, the unthinkable happened. He replied, "Morning." The response was so unexpected it sent a wave of shock across the entire floor. Lena was a model of quiet focus. She navigated the high-pressure environment with a grace that was almost mesmerizing. When problems erupted, she didn't panic. She simply and calmly solved them. Adrian noticed. He found himself drawn to her unwavering steadiness, a stark contrast to the usual chaos of his world. One day, during lunch, he saw her laughing with other staff members in the break room. Her smile seemed to illuminate the entire space, and for the first time in years, something warm stirred within him. He hadn't felt anything like it for so long, he'd almost forgotten it was possible. Later that day, he found himself saying, "You seem to get along with everyone." She offered a small smile and said, "I just try to be kind. It helps." He leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. "Kindness died in this building a long time ago." Her reply was soft but firm. "Then maybe it's time it lives again?" Those words echoed in his mind long after she left. The next morning, he arrived to find her already at her desk, humming a soft tune. "You're early," he observed. She looked up and smiled. "So are you." A quiet, comfortable moment passed between them. It was strange. She seemed to understand him without him needing to say a word. He started to look forward to her morning greetings, her calm voice a soothing balm on his otherwise harsh days. One night he was about to leave when he saw the light still on in her office. She was staying late to finish reports. "Go home, Lena," he said, standing in her doorway. "I will, right after I finish this," she answered, not looking up from her screen. He sighed. "You don't have to care so much." She finally met his gaze. "Maybe you're just not used to people caring." He turned away, his heart feeling strangely unsettled, and walked out without another word. A few days later, an unexpected sound echoed through the office. Laughter. He had accidentally pressed the wrong key on a new software program, causing the lights across the entire building to flicker erratically. Lena gasped, her eyes wide. "What did you do?" He couldn't help but smirk. "I broke it." And then she laughed, a sound so free and bright it was contagious. He found himself laughing too, a deep, genuine laugh for the first time in what felt like 20 years. The entire office froze. Whispers erupted in the hallways. Mr. Cole laughed. But for once, Adrian didn't care what they thought. He felt alive again. Then came the annual company gala. He despised these events. The flashing cameras, the schmoozing, the whispered gossip. But duty forced him to attend. As he stood there, enduring the barrage of attention, he saw her. Lena walked in wearing a simple, elegant blue dress. She wasn't flashy or ornate, just effortlessly graceful. He found he couldn't look away. She made her way over to him. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "I don't like crowds," he replied bluntly. She smiled knowingly. "I noticed." Then, with a playful glint in her eye, she teased, "You should dance." He scoffed. "I don't dance." "You might surprise yourself," she said before moving into the crowd. He almost smiled again. The next morning, the change in him was palpable. Meetings were smoother. The tension in the air had dissipated, and people were finally breathing easier. It was all because of Lena. But a storm was brewing. False news stories began circulating online, painting him as the ruthless tyrant he once was. The old anger surged back, and the office fell into a familiar, terrified silence. Just then, Lena entered his office, a picture of calm. "Sir," she said, holding a tablet, "I found proof these rumors are completely fake." He looked up, utterly stunned. "How?" "I stayed late," she explained. "I checked every source, traced the origins." He stared at her. "You did all that?" She simply nodded. "You don't deserve to be lied about." A single quiet phrase escaped his lips. "Thank you." That night, sitting alone in his vast, empty office, he opened a drawer in his desk. Inside was a small sticky note she'd left for him weeks ago. It simply read, "Smile more, Mr. Cole." And, sitting there in the dark, he smiled. He began watching her more closely after that. The focused way she worked, the easy way she smiled, the quiet strength she carried herself with. He felt something new taking root inside him, something powerful and maybe even a little dangerous. One evening, as she was packing up to leave, he asked the question that had been on his mind for weeks. "Why did you take this job, Lena?" She paused at the door and turned to face him. "Maybe I wanted to remind you how to feel." He froze, caught off guard. "You don't know me." "Maybe I know enough," she replied softly. And then she was gone. He stood there, motionless, his heart hammering against his ribs. Later that night, as rain lashed against the panoramic windows of his office, he whispered into the empty room, "Who are you really, Lena Hart?" Because somehow, in her face, in her spirit, he saw something that felt like fate, and he had a feeling that fate was just beginning its game. Weeks passed, and the office atmosphere felt lighter than ever. It was as if a long, dreary winter had finally given way to spring, and the change was most noticeable in one person, Adrian Cole. He had transformed in ways no one thought possible. He still worked with the same relentless drive, his words still measured and few. But the silence that once surrounded him like an impenetrable wall of ice no longer felt cold. It was a calm, quiet strength. And the reason for this change had a name. Lena Hart. He found himself smiling at the smallest things. A cheerful, sticky note she left on his monitor. The bright, genuine way she greeted him with, "Good morning, Mr. Cole." The quiet confidence with which she defended her ideas in meetings, never backing down when she knew she was right. She had, without even trying, dismantled the walls he'd spent 2 decades building, bringing a gentle peace to the fortress of his heart. One morning, he caught himself watching her again as she organized his schedule. She was focused, her brow furrowed in concentration, yet she radiated a kindness that seemed to touch everything around her. She was, he admitted to himself, beautiful. He quickly tore his gaze away, his cheeks flushing slightly, but his heart refused to obey. It hammered against his ribs, a frantic rhythm he hadn't felt in years. That afternoon, she appeared at his door with a container of food. "You skipped breakfast again," she said, her tone a soft chiding. He looked up from his work, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. "You notice everything, don't you?" he replied, his voice softer than he intended. She smiled back, a warm, radiant expression that lit up her face. "It's my job." He shook his head slowly. "You do more than your job, Lena," he said, the words heavy with unspoken meaning. He saw a faint blush creep up her neck as she looked down, a silent acknowledgement of the bond growing between them. With each passing day, their connection deepened, woven from shared glances, quiet conversations, and mutual respect. Yet, a strange unease began to stir within him. Every time he looked into her gentle eyes, an old, painful memory flickered at the edge of his consciousness. A ghost's voice, a phantom's smile, a name he hadn't allowed himself to speak in 20 years. That night, driven by a nameless dread, he found himself in the dust-filled attic, pulling out an old, leather-bound photo album. His hands trembled as he opened it. There, staring back at him from a faded photograph, was the face of his ex-fiancée, Elena Hart. His breath caught, and his chest tightened as if squeezed by an iron fist. The same last name, the same kind, gentle eyes. No, it was impossible. It had to be a coincidence. The next morning, however, the seed of suspicion had taken root. He watched Lena with a new, unnerving intensity. He studied her mannerisms, the way she tilted her head when listening, the small gesture she made with her hand when she was excited, the musical lilt in her voice. Everything about her felt hauntingly, painfully familiar. It was like seeing a ghost in broad daylight. Later that afternoon, as she hurried past his desk, she dropped her notebook, papers scattered across the floor. As Adrian bent down to help her gather them, a small, wallet-sized photo slipped out from between the pages. His hand froze as he picked it up. His world tilted on its axis. It was a picture of Elena Hart, and standing beside her, a radiant smile on her face, was a teenage Lena. His heart, which had just begun to thaw, turned to solid ice once more. The warmth he'd felt just moments before vanished, replaced by a chilling sense of betrayal. He waited, his face a mask of stone, until the last employee had left for the day. Then he buzzed her intercom. "Lena," he said, his voice eerily quiet. "Come to my office and close the door." She obeyed, her steps hesitant as she sensed the sudden glacial shift in his demeanor. He held up the small photograph. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Her eyes widened in panic. "You found it?" "You never told me who you really are," he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. He took a step closer, his eyes boring into hers. "You're her sister, aren't you?" Lena looked down at the floor, unable to meet his accusing gaze. The silence in the room was deafening, thick with unspoken history and broken trust. Finally, she whispered the one word that confirmed his worst fears. "Yes." Adrian's face darkened, his features hardening into a furious scowl. So this was all part of a plan? To get close to me? To dredge up the past and remind me of her? "No," she said quickly, her head snapping up, her eyes pleading. "Then why?" he snapped, his voice cracking. "Why lie to me?" "Because she hurt you," Lena confessed, her own voice breaking. "She hurt you so badly, and I just wanted to fix it." His chest tightened, the pain a physical ache. A part of him, the part that had come to care for her, wanted desperately to believe her. But the scars were too old, the wound too deep. "Fix it?" he asked, his voice dripping with bitterness. "You think you can just walk in here and fix 20 years of scars?" Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. "No, but I can try. I had to try." "You should have told me the truth from the beginning," he said, his voice turning cold as stone. "I was afraid," she whispered, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Afraid of what?" "I was afraid you'd hate me before you ever got the chance to know me." Adrian turned away from her, unable to look at the pain on her face because it mirrored his own. "I trusted you," he said quietly, the words like shards of glass. "You're just like her." "No," Lena cried out, the word torn from her soul. "I'm nothing like her." She took a step toward him, her hand outstretched. He flinched and stepped back as if her touch would burn him. "Leave," he said, the single word a final, brutal judgment. Her voice broke into a sob. "Adrian, please, please don't do this." "Now," he commanded, his voice devoid of all emotion. Defeated, Lena turned and walked out of the office, her body trembling with silent sobs. Her heart shattered into a million pieces as the elevator doors slid shut, sealing her away from him. In his office, Adrian stood frozen, his eyes filled with an agony he thought he'd never feel again. He had finally allowed himself to open his heart, only to have it ripped apart once more. The next day, her desk was empty. A void. The entire office felt hollow, the newfound lightness gone, replaced by the familiar, suffocating silence. He pretended not to notice. He pretended not to care. But every time his gaze drifted to her empty chair, a sharp pain lanced through his chest. The nights were silent again, but it wasn't a calm silence anymore. It was an empty, lonely one. Tucked away in his desk drawer was the note she had left him weeks ago. "Smile more, Mr. Cole." He found himself staring at her loopy handwriting for hours, the simple words a constant, painful reminder of what he had lost. He couldn't bring himself to throw it away. Days bled into a week. One morning, an envelope lay on his desk. It was from Lena. He recognized her handwriting immediately, though it trembled on the page. With shaking hands, he opened it. "I never wanted to hurt you." The letter began. "I only wanted to help heal what she broke. You taught me that even the coldest hearts can learn to feel again. Thank you for letting me be a small part of your story." Adrian read the letter again and again until the words were burned into his memory. Each sentence was a fresh wave of regret. He whispered to the empty, silent room, his voice choked with emotion. "You were never like her, Lena. Not at all." But it was too late. She was gone. He stood by the vast window of his office, looking out at the city lights. They blurred and swam before his eyes as tears he hadn't expected to fall traced paths down his cheeks. The man who had sworn off love for 2 decades, the man who had built a fortress around his heart, had just lost it all over again. And this time, he knew he had no one to blame but himself. Days blurred into nights, each one a stark, silent reminder that Lena was gone. Adrian Cole moved through his own office like a ghost, a shadow haunting the empire he'd built. Her chair, once a small, vibrant center of his world, now sat empty, a monument to her absence. Her coffee mug, the one with the silly little cat on it, gathered a thin layer of dust on the corner of his desk. He'd told her he hated it, but now its stillness felt like an accusation. Without her, the sleek, modern building felt cold again, the way it had before she arrived, before her quiet warmth had seeped into the very walls. He tried to lose himself in work, to drown out the silence with the rustle of papers and the incessant clicking of his keyboard. He told himself it didn't matter. She was just an assistant, easily replaceable. But his mind betrayed him at every turn. Every file he opened seemed to hold the faint scent of her perfume. Every distant sound in the hallway echoed the cadence of her footsteps. Her laughter, a sound he had so often tried to suppress with a stern glare, now replayed in his memory on a cruel loop. Her voice, calm and steady, was a phantom whisper against the hum of the city outside his window. He opened his desk drawer, searching for a pen, and his fingers brushed against a folded piece of paper. He knew what it was without looking. The note she had left him weeks ago. He unfolded it, the crease worn from his repeated, secret viewings. In her neat, elegant script were 4 simple words. "Smile more, Mr. Cole." A bitter, humorless sound escaped his lips. He couldn't. How could he smile when the one person who made him feel like it was possible was gone? A week later, the storm he'd been bracing for finally broke. It didn't come in the form of rain or thunder, but as a calculated attack from a rival firm. They had fabricated contracts, forged his signature, and leaked them to the press. The news spread like wildfire. Investors, once his staunchest supporters, panicked. His phone rang off the hook with angry, accusatory voices. Meetings descended into chaos. His boardroom transformed into a modern-day witch hunt where he was the one tied to the stake. Adrian fought with everything he had to hold the crumbling pieces of his company together. He worked for 2 nights straight, fueled by black coffee and sheer, stubborn will. He didn't rest. He didn't eat. There was only the suffocating weight of stress and the deep, profound silence of his empty office. Then, in the cold, gray hours of the early morning, a soft knock echoed from his office door. He looked up, his eyes gritty with exhaustion, his mind a foggy haze. And there she was, Lena. Her eyes were tired, shadowed with a weariness that mirrored his own, but they held a strength, a fire that cut through the gloom of the room. She walked to his desk and placed a thin file in front of him. "I found what caused the leak," she said, her voice soft but sure. He blinked, convinced his sleep-deprived mind was playing tricks on him. "You came back?" The words were barely a whisper, laced with disbelief and a hope he hadn't realized he was holding on to. "I couldn't stay away while everything burned," she replied, her gaze unwavering. With trembling hands, he opened the file. It was all there, the proof that saved his company. Emails, transaction records, names, a meticulous trail of evidence that unmasked the rival firm's deception. She had done it all on her own, from the outside, with no obligation to him. He stared at her, the documents blurring in his vision. "You did this? For me?" "For us," she corrected gently. "For what you built. It was worth saving." A knot tightened in his throat, making it hard to breathe. The memory of their last conversation, of the cruel, cutting words he had thrown at her, crashed down on him with suffocating force. He whispered, his voice thick with shame. "I said terrible things." "I know," she said, her voice impossibly kind. "But pain makes people cruel." He lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. "I never meant to hurt you." "I know that, too." A heavy silence filled the room, but it was different this time. It wasn't empty. It was filled with unspoken apologies, with shared exhaustion, with a fragile thread of understanding. Then Adrian did something that would have shocked anyone who knew him. He reached out, his movement slow, hesitant, and let his fingers gently brush against her hand where it rested on his desk. "Thank you," he said, the words raw and honest. "Thank you for coming back." A faint, tired smile touched her lips. "You're welcome, Mr. Cole." That night, the crisis ended as quickly as it had begun. Armed with Lena's evidence, Adrian's legal team dismantled the rival company's attack. His name was cleared, his reputation restored. But as he stood in his silent office, looking out at the city lights, the victory felt hollow. It didn't matter. What mattered was the quiet, steady calm that had settled in his heart, a peace he hadn't felt in years. Lena hadn't just saved his business, she had saved him. The next evening, as she was packing her things to leave, he asked her to stay. She turned, a question in her eyes. "Not as my assistant," he said quickly, his voice earnest. "As someone I can trust." Her eyes widened, a flicker of surprise and something more crossing her features. "Trust is a big word, Mr. Cole," she whispered. "For you," he said, his gaze holding hers. "It's the right one." And so they began to talk. Really talk, for the first time. Not about work or deadlines, but about life, about dreams, about the past that haunted them both. In the quiet intimacy of his office, he found himself telling her about Elena, the sister who had left him, the betrayal that had carved out his heart and left him empty. Lena listened without interruption, her entire being focused on him. When he finished, tears shone in her eyes. "I'm so sorry for what she did to you," she whispered. "It's not your fault," he said, a strange lightness filling his chest. "You've already healed what she broke." But the past, it seemed, wasn't finished with him yet. The very next day, a letter arrived. It was addressed to him, the handwriting elegant and eerily familiar. Lena handed it to him, her expression unreadable. He opened it. It was from Elena Hart, his sister. She was back in town. She wanted to see him. He read the letter, his face an emotionless mask. "She wants forgiveness," he said, his voice flat. "What will you do?" Lena asked, her own voice barely a whisper. "I don't know yet." That night he found himself standing by the window again, watching the rain fall, just as it had 20 years ago. The memories came flooding back, a broken promise, a white dress folded away, an empty altar that had marked the beginning of his long, lonely winter. But this time, the sharp edges of the pain felt lighter, softer, because someone had already come and quietly filled the cavernous space where the hurt used to live. The next morning, he found Lena in the office. "I'll meet her," he told her, his decision made. Lena nodded, a brave smile plastered on her face, but he saw the fear clouding her eyes. He saw the unspoken question. What if his old love returning meant he would forget her again? He saw the ache of her own heart. He stepped closer, his voice soft, meant only for her. "No matter what happens, thank you. Thank you for bringing me back to life." A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek, but she was smiling. "Don't thank me yet," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "The past is still knocking." He looked at her, really looked at her, for a long, silent moment. "Then I'll open the door one last time," he said, his voice filled with a new, quiet resolve. "And after that, never again." Outside the window, the sun finally broke through the gray, dreary clouds, casting a warm, golden light across his desk. And for the first time in 20 years, Adrian Cole felt ready to face his past. He was no longer alone. The day he had both dreaded and yearned for had finally arrived. Adrian Cole sat alone in a quiet downtown cafe, the soft patter of rain against the window pane a somber soundtrack to his thoughts. It had been 20 years since he'd last seen Elena Hart. He looked down at his hands, annoyed by the slight tremor that betrayed his carefully constructed composure. Then she walked in. Just like that, the world seemed to slow to a crawl. She was older, of course, but the years had sculpted her face with a quiet grace, and her eyes held the weight of 2 decades of unspoken memories. She spotted him, and her lips parted. Her voice a soft whisper carried across the room. "Adrian." He managed to find his own voice, a low murmur in return. "Elena." She sat opposite him, and for a long moment, the only sound was the rain and their silent breaths. The air between them was thick, heavy with the ghosts of a life they almost had. It was Elena who broke the silence. "I never came to hurt you," she began, her voice fragile. Adrian's gaze, which had been fixed on the swirling steam of his coffee, slowly lifted to meet hers. The question that had haunted him for 20 years finally escaped. "Then why did you leave?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Her confession was a sigh. "I was scared. Of us. Of the life we were building so fast." His eyes dropped back to his cup. The bitterness he had suppressed for so long rose to the surface. "You broke me, Elena. I forgot what love felt like because of you." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. "I know," she choked out, "and I've paid for it every single day." Adrian watched her for a moment before giving a slow, deliberate nod. "I don't hate you anymore," he said, the words feeling foreign yet true. "But I'm not the same man you left behind." A faint, sad smile touched her lips. "I can see that. Someone changed you." His gaze drifted past her, to the rain-streaked window overlooking the city. "Yes," he whispered, the admission hanging in the air. "Your sister did." Elena froze, her expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Lena?" He nodded. "She came into my life when I least deserved kindness." The silence returned, but this time it was different, filled with a new, startling truth. "She has your fire," he said softly, "but her heart is her own. It's gentle." Elena's composure crumbled slightly. "Does she know you're here? With me?" she asked. "No," he replied, his voice firm, "and I don't plan to hide it from her." Elena looked down at her hands, finally accepting the chasm that had formed between them. "You deserve peace, Adrian, even if it's not with me." "I already found it," he said, a quiet finality in his tone. With that, she pushed her chair back and stood up, tears falling silently now. "Then I'm glad," she whispered. "Goodbye." He watched her go, a solitary figure disappearing into the gray curtain of rain. "Goodbye, Elena." Adrian sat there for a long time, the cafe around him fading into a blur. And then he smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes, erasing the lines of pain that had been etched there for years. The crushing weight of 2 decades had finally lifted. Later that evening, he walked into his office. The lights were still on, and Lena was there poring over documents at her desk. She looked up, startled to see him. Her eyes were wide with a question she didn't dare ask. He saved her the trouble. "You met her?" she asked softly. "Yes," he confirmed, his voice steady. "And it's over." She didn't press for details. She just nodded, her concern palpable. "Are you okay?" she asked, her gentle voice a balm to a wound he hadn't realized was still there. "Better than I've ever been," he said, and he meant it. He walked toward her, stopping just a few feet away. "I told her something today," he said, his gaze locking with hers. "What?" she breathed. He took another step closer. "That her sister taught me how to love again." Lena's beautiful eyes instantly filled with tears, her breath catching in her throat. "You really mean that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Every word." He reached out, his hands slowly, carefully taking hers. They were warm, grounding him in the present. "You came into my life like sunlight after a storm," he said, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur. "And I never want that light to fade." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Adrian," she began, but he just smiled. "No more, Mr. Cole," he said softly. "Just Adrian." She let out a soft laugh, a tear escaping to trace a path down her cheek. "Then stop being my boss," she teased, her courage returning. "Gladly," he replied, his thumbs gently stroking the backs of her hands. "I'd rather be something else." Her eyes searched his. "And what's that?" He didn't hesitate. "Yours." The word hung in the air between them, a promise and a prayer. She blinked, the shock giving way to a brilliant, dazzling smile. "You're serious?" "Completely." He closed the remaining distance between them. The scent of rain and her light perfume filled his senses. "You made me remember what love feels like." She looked up at him, her heart in her eyes. "And what does it feel like now?" she asked softly. He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. "Like home," he whispered. Outside, the city lights sparkled, reflected in the rain-slicked glass walls of the office. He gently brushed a stray tear from her cheek with his thumb. "No more running from love," he said. She looked up at him, her own resolve hardening. "No more fear," she replied. They stood there, wrapped in a peaceful silence, their hearts finally beating in the same rhythm. The billionaire who had sworn off love for 20 long years had found it again. Not in the cold gleam of his riches or the echo of his power, but in the simple, profound warmth of kindness. He leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "You changed everything," he whispered against her skin. She smiled, a contented, happy smile. "And I'd do it again." In the quiet of the office, as the lights of the city glowed around them, it felt as though their story was just beginning. The storm had finally passed, leaving nothing but the promise of a new dawn.